community, right? When you're a Bitcoiner, sometimes you're so alone in your family and friends that you have that urge to meet other Bitcoiners. So honestly, that's where it started from. We wanted to, just meet the Bitcoiners around physically, talk to them, say hi. So we did our first meetup just 1.5 years back, honestly, and it was like when you create something where a lot of good people or Bitcoiners are coming together. It created such a magnetic field that people who were Bitcoin curious also started joining. They started asking questions. So before we knew it, it spiraled into something much bigger than we had initially thought. And people were ready to come in and help out from different cities, from remote parts of India that we weren't even aiming to reach to. And what we found that there are hardcore Bitcoiners pretty much everywhere. You go to the base of Himalayas, you go to the south of the country. We found Bitcoiners everywhere. So it kind of spiraled. It's it emerged to be a wider community than we thought. So that's how Bitcoin for India started. And I think, that's how we'll continue.
Okay, so to explain how Bitcoin to Liban came to be, I have to really explain my own journey in a short, brief way. So I'm a pharmacist. I have nothing to do with the financial system or Bitcoin, anything. I never really understood the money. And of course, like many of us, I joined during the bull run in 2017. Of course, I went to crypto and I started buying shitcoins, all kinds of sort of things. Yeah, it's standard. But the thing is, we already have communities in Lebanon, but unfortunately, they really focus on trading, promoting this kind of projects, smart contracts and selling the keywords, blockchains, whatever you want to call it. And I was really interested in that, and it was something totally new to me. And of course, greed took over, and I want to buy and buy and buy. But at some point, like a year and a half later, in the mid-2018, I figured out that those things don't really make sense. And I was lucky enough to read the Bitcoin Standard. And thanks to all the Mexican toxic Maxics, I finally started to understand what's going on. And I fell down the rabbit hole. And now, the thing is, fast forward 2019, I started studying all the histories from different countries, Venezuela, Argentina, and all the places. And I found so many similarities to Lebanon. I went nuts like a clown. I was like, guys, this is bad. We're having a 15% interest rates in Lebanese banks, and this is gonna collapse. This is unsustainable, like really unsustainable. And like a clown and crazy person telling, the world is gonna end, the bank is gonna end. No one listened to me. But of course, it happened. So as of today, Lebanon lost 98% of their purchasing power, the Lebanese lira. Majority of the banking system is non-functional. We actually have a parallel banking system. But the thing is, as I said, we already had crypto communities. And once we hit the hyperinflation, or the beginning of the hyperinflation, I knew there has to be something done in order to protect and to speed up the education for the people like me who have nothing to do with the whole system. They don't understand the system. And of course, they'll be like pulled in by the greed. And there's so many scammers that they're going to use that opportunity to, exploit take advantage of Lebanese people to just suck out the money out of them. So the purpose of it was to start Bitcoin to Liban to educate and to help people avoid all the kind of scams, bullshit that's going on, and at least shorten the journey from crypto into Bitcoin into the freedom.
Okay.
So you all talked about identifying a need and knowing that you wanted to bring the education, wanted folks to know about Bitcoin. But what has been the biggest challenge in actually doing that, to connecting with folks, bringing the education, and building either outside of or on top of existing systems where you work and live?
So just like you mentioned, there was the wave of crypto in Cameroon, and a lot of people had bad experiences with the crash. So when you come and you talk about Bitcoin now, everybody thinks that is a scam like crypto. But the way we walked around that was to start with a really small group. So I created a group on Telegram, and I started training 21 people. Well, the number is symbolic because it's 21 million Bitcoins, right? So the idea is find 21 people that you could completely shield from all of the shitcoinery that happens outside, and you give them skills that they could use to earn money in Bitcoins. Now, this group would be able to inspire 21 other people. So if each of the 21 people inspires 21 people, that's 21 times 21, and then it will be like a ripple effect. So start small, scale slowly, then suddenly you would be able to orange build a larger community of people.
Anyone else?
I think like the challenge in not only in Indonesia but I think Southeast Asia in particular is that people love to gamble, and therefore they're prone to get into scam. So there's a lot of misconception about Bitcoin or a project that use the name of Bitcoin but actually just scam. So like within our community, like this is a daily conversation. Someone's gonna come and then say like, "Hey, have you ever heard about this project? Blah blah blah." We call it's a scam. There's even mining or stuff like that. So it's a very tricky subject. And I think the other challenge is actually educating the regulator, because because of the scam, of course, the regulator wants to protect the people, and then like creating. Like a regulation that is doesn't make any sense. So this we try doing slowly, having a conversation with with the governor or with a government body or even organization. But it takes it's like a slow process for sure. A part of educating people, but also we have to educate the government as well.
In case of Bitcoin for India, it was these challenges were there, but the initial challenge was simply operational. It's such a huge geographically and distance-wise huge landscape that it's very difficult to go out there and conduct so many meetups. So while as developers, as people in the community, our urge was growing to let more people know, because some really good questions were coming in. People were using the products. They were really liking what we were saying. So there was an urge growing, and there was kind of a mini Cambrian explosion. People from different cities were reaching out to us suddenly. So though that was happening, it was just operationally impossible for us to manage it. So how do we do that? So what we started doing is we relied on the open source ethos, where we started kind of forking out stuff we do. So what that means is that instead of trying to go to every meetup and conducting it, we just let the local person run it. We just tell them how we have done, what we have learned, give them some tools, give them some presentations, and then let them run it. It was a completely the same way as someone forks open source library and works on it, and that was amazing. One, it was operationally efficient. It was something that just blew across the country. A lot of people started it on their own, and more importantly, they had the autonomy, and they were able to cater the theme of the meetup or whatever workshop they are doing to the need of the audience there. And there's a lot of diversity, but one diversity that happens is the intellectual diversity. So different people want different things. And when someone is, conducting a meetup somewhere, their friends and family, people in that city are going to come. So no one is going to better understand the vibe than the person who is organizing it. So, let them choose the theme, let them do what they want to do. So that's really something that helped us operationally, and even making it much more widely spread. A lot of these people, started off with a Bitcoin for India meetup, but then they started doing something on their own, which is completely fine. We still support them. That's what happens in forking. If you fork it, you can do something on your own. But a lot of people also contributed back. Yeah. Okay, we had this meetup. This is the presentation I used. It was really well appreciated. Just keep it with you to pass around. So that really helped us. That was the challenge, and that is how we overcame it.
Okay, so in Lebanon, it's kind of a specific and unique case. I mean, it's the same all over the world. But the thing is that the whole hyper-elevation thing just happened right now. We were living in Lebanon for 20 years in more or less big system. So everything was fine. Everyone's really happy. Everyone had the latest phones. Everyone's having the latest cars. It was really, really fancy. And every single person wore Louis Vuitton, basically, T-shirts and everything. Really rich country, and we were proud of it. So we really ignored all the situation and financial. We were really focused on politics and, well, having fun and enjoying. That's the Lebanese way. But this is the problem. When the hyperinflation hit us, the beginning of hyperinflation hit us in 2019, people really don't understand or didn't understand what's going on. They mainly blamed it on political affiliates and politicians, and it's some kind of a game. They're just playing with us. They're trying to force someone, ex-country, to whatever obedience. But anyway, the major problem and challenge that I'm facing right now is the financial literacy. As I said, we are just entering the whole problem. We are kind of in denial of what's going on, and people do not want to read books. They don't want anything, spend time on the most valuable thing, which is money and your own life and energy. They don't want to do that. They always ask me, like, okay, can you summarize Bitcoin in 1 minute? I'm like, yeah, buy Bitcoin. But no, seriously, we're not a financial advice, but the point is, like, you cannot summarize. You really have to spend some time and understanding what's going on. It's not about Bitcoin, but about your own life and freedom. Once you understand that, once you understand what is money, life will change.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And thinking about what all of you said and how you scaled your work and made sure things can grow, how do you do that? How do you grow your organizations while also protecting yourselves? I say that because, they're twofold. There are not many governments who have wholeheartedly embraced Bitcoin or any sort of non-fiat government-issued currency, right? And then outside of that, there can be a perception that if you were involved in Bitcoin or how the space works, that you are wealthy, and thus there is a focus on you. So how do you navigate that as individuals while also growing your organizations?
Start?
Sure, I don't mind starting. Well, actually, we were discussing it earlier, guys, right?
Yes.
But the thing is, it's a very tricky question. Usually, the perception that if you are a Bitcoiner or in crypto, let's call it a shitcoiner, you are a rich person, most likely. So all your friends and family always come up to you like, how much Bitcoin do you have? Well, did you send it on the top or anything like sort of that? But imagine
That is not enough.
Yeah, I always say the same thing, but if you're trying to build a community and there's like 2,000 or 3,000, 5,000 members, you don't know who they are, and you don't know what kind of wacko just joins you and think that there's something going on. And especially like in a country that was just stroked with hyperinflation and financial system, and the salaries of people are down to $10, $15 a month, that's really a crisis. It used to get like $2,000, $3,000 a month, and all of a sudden it's $20. So what they're supposed to do. And once they hear about crypto, and once they hear about Marco, and once they hear about Bitcoin du Liban, that guy is loaded. Let's follow him. But the thing is, you have to be really careful. And my advice would be to make sure to distinguish between crypto groups and make a small, unique for yourself, a Bitcoin group. Make sure that those people are verified Bitcoiners, and take care of your OPSEC. So always choose public places, places where you have security. Anyone that's suspicious, don't make it too public about what you're doing, especially if you're doing a live event or like face-to-face. And I would just advise, stick to online till you understand or verify who you're talking to.
I think I came at it from a slightly different angle because I was already talking a lot about Bitcoin even before we started this initiative. So knowingly or unknowingly, I was already, I was never anonymous. I was already known out there. Most of my friends and family and everyone knew me as that weird Bitcoin guy. So I couldn't avoid that. But having entered this space and learning from a lot of people here, irrespective of the community, taking your privacy and OPSEC seriously is super important. You might be running a community, you might not be running a community, irrespective of that. It is so important for us that we have built a product on it. Bitcoin Keeper is about something which is like, your personal security, the $5 ranch attack security, the privacy that you should be taking care of. So I'm not an expert at these things, but I do understand the importance of it at a personal level and at a community level. And a lot of people do come to us asking about, how should they go about their privacy and security piece. So we have used that as an opportunity to educate more people on that piece, sending out links and sending out presentations that we have done so that they learn about it. So though it is a problem, but it's also something you can talk about and reach out to more people. So that's what I would.
Maybe I mean, I agree with whatever they say, but regarding like security, I guess like also like the most important thing is again educating people about how you can store your Bitcoin, so then they also understand like how hard it is to extract Bitcoin from you. So that's probably like one of my take. But to answer your question for the first question, how you can grow the community. At least if for my case in Indonesia, like this community is not started by me, but it's like basically from different community that has the same passion with Bitcoin, the same interest. Like we band together under one entity, and also like to decentralize the knowledge. So maybe I'm not the most knowledgeable person about trading, but there's someone in the group that knowledgeable in trading, so their community will teach other community. So that's like mostly like our conversation. We do like meetups in multiple countries at the same time, to celebrate like this oneness. And running conferences is it's a good way to network, because like once you have a face-to-face meetings, then you will get connected.
Yeah, sure. So the way we grew our community, originally I was posting on Facebook just talking about Bitcoin as though I was holding a megaphone into the air without really knowing who was listening. But then gradually, I was building an audience on Facebook. People would ask questions in the comment section. Okay, what is Bitcoin? What does it do for you? And things like that. But to make it sustainable, I had to run it as a for-profit education business and staffing agency. So the idea was, because Bitcoin is internet money, you could do a lot of jobs online from anywhere in the world. So we would train you for 12 months. But then, now this might surprise a lot of people, you get to sign a student loan contract of $10,000. And there are 21 students. So that is $210,000 of future income. In the case where we find you a job after your year of training. If we don't find you a job, you don't get to pay the loan. But in the course of that year, what we do is we find people that are very bullish on Bitcoin and who believe that there would be opportunities for Bitcoiners to earn. And we resell those contracts to them at half price, which means that a $210,000 contract, we're going to sell it to you for $105,000, which is the resources that we use in the present to pay for teaching, training, material, and things like that. Now, like I said before, when people see success, they want to emulate it, all right? So we're counting on the first cohort. When they finish and they have jobs and they are earning, of course, people around them would want to copy that success and they'll want to study, and that is how we would grow Bitcoin knowledge, first of all, in our communities, make people to earn money, teach them how to invest that money, and inspire other people to want to join the course.
Thank you. Oh. Okay. Oh, Marcel, you wanted to say something?
Actually, I do want to add something. I guess I was watching these sessions from the early morning today, and I spent all day in the sauna. Yeah, and I did the same mistake as a Faisal, wearing a jacket just to look better. But you know what? I was listening to every single person, and I was writing down notes, awesome. And there's common things that came up, like node of network, human ATM, education, serving people, bringing people to community, and it just made me like realize more how communities are so important. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like modular granularity, which I'm trying to say is that building community, it's the base of foundation of every single thing. If you want to help any kind of a journalist or freedom fighter, you need a community to support. Even if you are trying to send from out, you need a local community to help those people to maybe liquidate or whatever you want to do. So communities are the heart of Bitcoin. That's what I believe.
Marcel, that was beautiful. So true. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our session. What is one thing that you would tell folks to do if they want to help? If they want to help or contribute to the work that you're doing, how can they do that? I'm going to start with Dia. We're going to mix it up.
Okay, well, support us by coming to our conference. Like we're gonna have a conference in October 26, 27 in Bali, Indonesia Bitcoin Conference. We have many plans, like doing a lightning hackathon, so then more and more developer in Indonesia understand about lightning network, and then create something amazing from different perspective, from like Indonesian perspective. So yeah, like if you want to support, like come into our conference. Yeah.
Thank you, Dia.
I think before you go there, you should come to the conference in India. It's on.
Do a tour.
Yeah. So you can do conference hopping 14th and 15th October in India, and then we'll figure out a way for you to reach Indonesia. I think one thing I would leave everyone with is that we have talked about challenges, we have talked about the security risk, and how do you grow the network and all that. But ignore that for a second. You have also heard previously in this session and across the days that how important the community is. Fedi team clearly has built a whole business around community. Obi clearly mentioned that community is a superpower, and it is a superpower. If you do not have a community, this is a community. Freedom Forum is a community. HRF is a community, right? Without community, nothing really works. If there was no Bitcoin community, I wouldn't have the work I'm doing. Also, when you have a community and you're doing like some education stuff or development stuff that I am doing in parallel, it always helps. Because I'm building something, it's very easy, not very easy, but it is really good for me to explain it to people. And when I explain it to them and I hear their problems, it's very easy, very useful for me to get it back into my product. So community can help you in several ways. It can support you. It can, make sure that you are more aware of what you're doing, talk to the users much more. So though there are challenges, if you have any inclination of, starting a community from where you are, please reach out to any one of us and we'll tell you all the good parts of it.
May I also add on that, like, since, this is a convergence between the human rights communities, like freedom communities, and also Bitcoin, like, within your community, always like share your voice, share your expertise, because everyone is different. Like someone is probably really good at the security or like building apps. Someone is working in the NGO and then doing some freedom activism. Share with each other, and that's like the reason why we have communities. Open source, yeah. So
open source stuff you do, and you will get it back.
Exactly.
Thank you for that call.
I'll try to make it short and very sweet for the people who are trying to, reach out to communities. I think that the minute you send a message to a community and say, "How can I help?" you're already becoming the part of the community. And that's the best thing you can do. Just reach out, drop a message, and just we'll take it from there, because everyone is welcome, and it doesn't really matter where you're coming from or what's your background, education. It really doesn't matter. As long as you just ask, how can I help?
Thank you, Marcel. To your last word?
Sure. So it is an online community to start with, although we are using that online community to influence a physical district in Africa, Bitcoin Mountain. So we would encourage people to just join our Twitter feed, consume our content, discover the people within the community, and then we are creating projects as we go along. Right now, we're about to launch a community bank. So we are issuing peer-to-peer credit. And it's based off of something that we've been doing in Cameroon for a long time. They call them Jangies. So we are launching that for our community. So anybody who joins on Twitter, we could add you to the Jangi group, and then we figure out ways to pool capital, peer-to-peer, and figure out investments that we could do collectively. Although the first set of investments that we're doing is raising the money to pay for their education as a loan, which you get back with profit when the student is working and earning, just so that it's sustainable.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your work with everyone here. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to keep it rolling in... Check. There we go. Okay. Okay. It's time to talk some Noster. Yes, let's hear for Noster. All right, so the next chat, it's entitled Decentralized Social Networks. So, in a world with increasing censorship and deplatforming risks on social media hubs like Twitter and Facebook, engineers are developing new, more decentralized models. Earlier this year, a new social networking protocol called Noster began gaining popularity. Yeah. We're going to hear from the builder of one of the most popular Noster apps on the value of unstoppable communications. So we're going to welcome up Will to chat about Damus and much more.
All right. Thank you, Ben. So, got some Noster fans in here, maybe. Yes, I'm here to talk about decentralized social networks. So this is a relatively new idea, but we're trying to build a new type of social network which is not controlled by these large big tech institutions. So I'm really excited to be here at the HRF, at this event. I'm really appreciated that I've been invited. It's just insane, like in terms of just the people I've met and the people who are here and their stories. It actually just like reinvigorates me and makes me super passionate about this technology because it actually can have a huge impact on the world. And I'm super excited for how this technology can be applied to human rights use cases. So I started working on an application called Damus, and it's for the iOS App Store. And it's a Noster client. So Noster is, again, this is this new decentralized social media client. And I launched it in February, and it's kind of blown up, and it's really exciting, and people are really interested. So hopefully, I'm gonna explain a little bit about what we're doing and how we're kind of integrating financial freedom and things that are really useful to human rights. So what's the problem? A big issue with a lot of the platforms today is that they are controlled by big tech corporations. And they have their own interests. Their interests are they want to make money, and you are the product. So a lot of the ways that information is presented to users on these platforms is driven by advertisements. Because they want to get your eyeballs on advertisements. And to do that, they have a bunch of techniques. So they use algorithms like AI. And a lot of these AIs, they'll actually... what ends up happening is that they'll just promote this like aggressive, angry content that makes people upset, and because it gets clicks. So this is like a very unhealthy way that we're building this. Like this is our free speech online, and the fact that so much of the way that information is presented on these networks is driven by these algorithms just so we can buy things. It just feels very wrong, and so I feel like social media. Decentralized social media protocols has a way to like bring more humanity back into discussion online, and one that's not driven by for-profit motives. So, in my country, in Canada, we recently experienced for these trucker protests, and which Ben was on the ground, a big part of that as well, but. We started to see where things break down when these big tech corporations, they just go along with whatever the government says. So basically, a good example of this is a lot of accounts were shut down, a lot of accounts were censored, protesters' bank accounts were frozen. So if we're going to solve not only this free speech issue where deplatforming and shadow banning is causing so many issues, we also need to solve what does it look like to transact on this network, to send value on this network? Because a big part of these protests were about people are on the ground, they're trying to get fuel, they're trying to get food, and their bank accounts were getting shut down. So imagine a situation where you actually could transact using a social network and send peer-to-peer uncensorable money on the network itself. It's a very powerful idea, because imagine if someone just reposted something and it was like, hey, I need help, and then people around the world can help in real time in an uncensorable way. And I feel like that's a super powerful use case, which we're starting to see on these networks, such as Damas and other clients. So what's the solution for the free speech part of this? So we're built on the Noster protocol. Noster is this relatively new idea. I think it started in 2020 by Fiat Jaff, and it's kind of so silly. It's so simple. It's like people always ask me, like, why didn't we think about this before? Like, it's kind of silly how simple it is. So the basic idea is that it's not a single platform. It's not a single company that's running these relays. They're all run by different volunteers and contributors. And when you do a post, it's sending to all the relays. Anyway, I'm going to get into a separate slide about this, but it's a really cool technology for freeing speech online. And in terms of the financial freedom, it made sense to integrate Bitcoin just because, I mean, come on, there's nothing really else. Everything else is kind of scammy and it's a joke. Bitcoin is really the only free. It's the money on the internet. There's nothing that comes close to it. So it made sense to integrate Bitcoin and Lightning. So these new developments in Lightning had a huge impact on how it was integrated into Nostra. So Lightning enables real-time payments. So like, why not integrate that into a free speech protocol as well? So what is Nostra? So Nostra stands for Notes and Other Stuff Transmitted Over Relays. It's a relatively simple idea of all the data is controlled by keys and users. So this is the biggest distinguishing factor of this protocol. Almost every other platform, you are sending your post to a central server, and that data is owned by those companies, and they can do whatever they want with it. They could even forge the data. They could change the data if they really wanted to. But this protocol does not allow that. Every piece of data you produce on this protocol, it's signed by your key that only you have. So this is very powerful because all the hosting and all the relays, the only responsibility they have is basically just storage. They can't change the data, because if they change the data, it'll be invalid. So it basically gives power back to the users. And instead of, so I mentioned this before, but instead of sending to one relay, you're sending it to like 10 relays run by different people, and this gives it its censorship-resistant properties. So the first thing you'll notice when you download Damas or any other Nostra client is that there are no identifying information. You're not entering your email. You're not entering like your government ID or anything. Literally, you just generate a key, and you can get started. So this is really important if you're an activist on the ground and you're trying to, get something started, and you don't want to be giving away your identities to be a target. So you can just generate a key and get going. And we think this is really important, and we think more apps should be doing this as well. So, does it work? So this is it's a relatively new idea. Like, people are starting to use it, but is it scaling? Is it working? So we launched Damas in February, and within a week, I'd say almost like 5 days, 2 days. Sorry, I got COO here is correcting me on the data. Thank you. We got 220,000 installs, and then within 2 days, we were pulled from the Chinese mainland app store. So the CCP was already on top of this before a lot of people. So that was really interesting. If China comes after you, if the CCP comes after you, you're on the right path, I think. Yeah, Edward Snowden joined the network soon after. He's like, smells like fear. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. So soon after that, though, about probably a month later, we started noticing that all of our kind of like initial bootstrap relays within Damas were starting to get banned by the firewall in China. So not only were they just did the quick fix, but they're also looking into the technology and making sure that all the relays were banned so that no one can access them. So I had to create a new feature within Damas that allows people to change the bootstrap relay so that you could still connect. And so I felt like it's like a cat and mouse game between the CCP and Nostra clients at this point, but I think we're winning. And I believe that because a few days after I did this feature, I got this message: "We're still here." Yeah, when I saw this message, I'm like, wow, it's amazing that they're finding ways to get around the firewall, by VPNs, switching their Apple accounts to Hong Kong. You could even just like bounce notes off of like satellites. As long as you can get your piece of data onto this network, it's really hard to censor because there's so many different relays, and you can always get around the firewall in some ways. So that's like, once I saw this message, I'm like, well, this is something. This is amazing, and I got to keep working on this. So a big part of the app is Zaps. So this is a technology that, thank you for this. Zaps are a way to send micro amounts of Bitcoin to users. So you imagine if you're making a post that says, hey, like, I need fuel at this protest. You can just do a post. It can be reposted, and people can start zapping your post and sending you money. There's no limit. Like, someone could zap you $1 million on a post. Someone could zap you 0.01 cent on a post. So this is the power of Bitcoin, and this is the power of free speech money on a free speech network. But soon after, I mean, recently, actually, I just recently added these slides because of something that's happened recently. Apple asked me to remove the Zap button from the post because it's considered selling digital content. And I just wanted to point out that, you know, we feel like this technology is making these huge impacts on free speech and human rights. And for Apple to come after me about some minor thing so that it's going to make them slightly more money, it's just absolutely ridiculous. So I think we need to push against these corporate, monopolies and say, like, look, like, there's more important things happening here than your profits, and we need to make sure that these technologies are easy to use. So right now, I'm going to have to update Damus to only have the zaps on the profile, so you'll still be able to zap people in need. But it's kind of lame. And I think Elon, there's like one thing where I actually agree on Elon is like we're all kind of suffer by these policies. Like Elon has Twitter, and maybe he wants to add a tip button for Dogecoin. I don't know, but there's similar issues across the board. So what's our mission? Extend free speech and free speech money to 100 million users. Let's make this as easy as possible so that everyone can be using this technology and to get freedom around the world and into everyone's phone. That's the goal. Our team, it's composed of basically just contributors, voluntary contributors from around the world. Anyone can contribute to Damus. It's all open source. So we're mainly funded by grants. HRF grants have been very helpful. OpenSats. We have a great team. We have a great advisor. Jack Dorsey's been he's a huge Damus fan. You'll see him greeting. He's like we call him the Walmart greeter on Damus because he'll just like greet all the new users. So he's been great support, and he's been helping fund as well. But yeah, we're reliant on grants. We don't want to become VC funded and controlled. We want this to be open and free. We also have a team of 20 translators around the world. We're translated in 24 languages. I think the first release on the App Store, there was translated in like 13 or 14 languages. So the amount of people helping across the world to make this a reality has just been absolutely incredible. Human rights activists. We want to learn from you. We want to help you. What things can we add to Damus to make your use cases a reality? This is an open protocol. Anyone can help. We can make this the most powerful tool for human rights activists, and I want to talk to you, so talk to me after, talk to our team. How can we help? So we have a conference in Tokyo coming up in November, in Australia. You can go to Noster World to register. We also have a satellite meetup in Hong Kong, so please register. If you want to learn more, you want to get involved, come to Tokyo. It's going to be a lot of fun. Jack's going to be there, hopefully. Holding it to you, Jack. Come on. You'll be there. Yeah. So thank you. I just want to add one thing, which is so Damus in Latin stands for to give, and in Noster in Latin stands for ours. So that's why I truly believe that it represents those ideas. So thank you.
Okay, well, that's kind of amazing. I live in Vancouver, in Canada, as well with Will, and I have to say that with everything that happened with COVID and the Canadian government and just how our freedoms were taken away, it was very discouraging. So when Damus came up, I felt that the community got reinvigorated and re-energized because now we had a platform where we couldn't get deplatformed or censored, so it's been really, really wonderful to see this explode since February. So if you're an activist, again, like Will said, please go and speak to him. We need the feedback so that this platform can work very well for you. Okay, with all that said, our next fireside is called From Tether to Tornado Cash, the Human Impact of DeFi. Decentralized finance has been a much mocked topic in the wake of the collapse of Terra, Luna, BlockFi, and FTX. But dollar stablecoins, like Tether, continue to provide utility to millions of people around the world, and protocols like Tornado Cash gave enough privacy to users that they attracted the ire of governments. So now you'll hear from an early Ethereum engineer and the founder of one of the most popular crypto platforms on differentiating the signal from the noise. So please welcome Lane Rettig and Sergej Kotliar.
Back into the sauna. How's everybody feeling? Nice and warm.
It's actually chilly down here.
Hey, everybody. Wow. Oh, yeah, so sorry. Keep your mic very close to your mouth, because these
Like
mics
this?
Yeah, that's
Right.
that's good. Yeah. We want to make sure everyone hears us. Thank you. Yeah, wow, what an honor and a privilege to be here with you guys today. I think this is a really important, exciting topic, so thank you so much for coming to listen, giving us your attention. We are going to talk about Bitcoin, of course, but we're going to talk about things adjacent to Bitcoin as well. Hopefully that's not too controversial. But let's start with intros. Sergej, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and BitRefill?
Sure, yeah. I'm the CEO of a company called BitRefill. Some of you may know it.
Hold the mic closer to your mouth.
We're working on making Bitcoin money. And what kind of money is it if you can't actually buy stuff with it, right? And that's what we're doing. Like we run an online shop where you can buy gift cards for digital goods, e-commerce, things like that. If you're here in Norway, you can buy Uber Eats or whatever, pay with Bitcoin, pay with stablecoin. We're going to get to that, I guess. 3 clicks, no signups required, privacy, and so on.
Sergej's being very modest, but I'll just add that BitRefill is, in my opinion, just a really essential piece of both technical and social infrastructure in the Bitcoin world. As many folks here know, once you have Bitcoin, thanks to amazing technologies like Lightning and a lot of the technologies people in this room are working on and aware of, it's relatively easy to move that Bitcoin around, but it's not so easy to use that Bitcoin in the kind of physical world to buy goods and services. I think BitRefill is probably the most important platform that's supporting people, and a lot of people rely very heavily on that. You guys are in more than 150 countries and territories, right? It's a very high number.
We stopped counting, really.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'll just share it.
Most of them.
30-second
not
anecdote.
all of them, but most of them. But I mean, nobody even knows how many countries there are there, right? It's a disputed
well, that's why I
topic.
said countries and territories. It's a little gray area. But we were at breakfast with Kay. I don't know if Kay's in the room. A really wonderful activist from Madagascar. And we were chatting about you and about BitRefill and about this panel, and we said something, I think Alex was there as well, and we were like, let's see if BitRefill works in Madagascar. And we were kind of a bit skeptical, but actually you had like more than a dozen ways to spend Bitcoin in Madagascar. So I think that's pretty awesome. Anyway, just throwing that out there. I'm Lane. I am a former Ethereum core developer, currently working on a project called Space Mesh, very deep in consensus mechanisms and kind of the technical side, protocol design, that kind of stuff. Maybe potential future Bitcoin core developer. I don't know. I had dinner with a bunch of amazing Bitcoin core devs yesterday, and they really inspired me to jump back into Bitcoin. So So I guess the first thing I want to say is that Bitcoin is, as you've heard from amazing people on this stage and throughout this conference, it's a lifeline. It's a vital lifeline. It's a super important technology for activists and many other people, marginalized folks and groups around the world. But there are other technologies that a lot of these same groups of people are relying on, and a couple of them are in the title of this panel, or fireside chat, which is Tether and Tornado Cash. And so, I thought we'd maybe just start by talking about them and introducing them. Maybe you want to take Tether, and then I'll kind of talk about what Tornado Cash is, like what it is, what it means to you guys.
Yes, I mean, people know Tether, right? It's a stable coin. It's a...
Well, maybe then talk about stablecoins. What are they? What's the history?
Stablecoins is a token. Most frequently, I guess today, traded on some kind of Ethereum type chain that is backed by, it's an IOU from the Tether company that promises to pay you $1 in exchange for this, and it's being traded in an economy much like Bitcoin, but without the volatility.
So, I mean, you kind of touched upon the big upside of stablecoins, which is the lack of volatility. this is obviously an issue if you're holding Bitcoin as a store of value. I've personally had a lot of conversations with folks in the developing world, places like El Salvador, Cuba, who have no choice but to rely on cryptocurrency in general and Bitcoin specifically, but then have faced issues with, I mean, we all know how volatile Bitcoin can be. But there are downsides as well, big downsides potentially to stablecoins, I think. Do you want to touch upon that, or like some of the risks involved?
Well, I mean, it's an IOU. It has an existential risk. We don't know, is that company going to disappear for their own reasons? Or, I mean, there's all kinds of things. Like, I mean, Bitcoin, you don't, with some caveats, but you mostly don't trust anyone with your money, right? Whereas in this case, you do, and this is why Bitcoiners are apprehensive about it, because hell, not your keys, not your cheese, and here you have some keys, but you have the keys to an IOU, but at the same time, what we're seeing, and it's not just Bitrefill, I think, from talking to people dealing in like peer-to-peer trading all over the world. Especially in emerging markets, is that more and more of that activity is happening with stablecoins, with Tether, with USDC, other solutions, and we're talking about like, is it because people don't know? I think people know that they have these risks, and I think a lot of people will accept that existential risk in exchange for knowing for sure that the $10 that I have here in my wallet are going to be $10 tomorrow, not $9.50. So yeah, and that's I think where we are, is that like a lot of growth. I mean, from Bitrefill, what we added Tether 3 years ago, and up until that point, in general, like from our sales volumes, it was 90% Bitcoin. It was always
98, yeah.
Huh?
You were 98% Bitcoin.
No, 90 plus.
90 plus percent Bitcoin.
Yeah, from inception until a couple of years ago, and these
just to put things in perspective, the Bitcoin like market dominance isn't that high, right? It's bounced around between something like 40 and 60-ish%, but so
exactly.
Disproportionately Bitcoin.
But I think I trust more our dominance metric more. Because it's about transactional use. Like everything in crypto, you can just someone deposits $1 billion somewhere and some number goes up somewhere. Like this is like real world activity, like people buying stuff. And for the longest time, there wasn't all that much activity, even though like in Ethereum and so on, there was a big market cap. There wasn't that much activity that we would see. And that was like a good basis for like the classic maximalist argument, which was about network effects, which is something I hear not often enough maybe these days. That like, well, if 90% of everything is in Bitcoin, then eventually Bitcoin is just going to grow to 100. And these days, like nowadays, Bitcoin's down at 30% of our volume. And stablecoins combined across multiple stablecoins across multiple chains are also 30, right? And growing.
That's by transaction volume or okay.
However you want to slice it, really. And so this is a trend, and people are using it. And I think, like for us, we had to go through a bit of soul searching. Like, are we a Bitcoin company? And what is a Bitcoin company? It's like difficult philosophical question. I think we like go down to core principles that like, is Bitcoin the goal or is Bitcoin the means towards another goal? Well, I think Bitcoin is the means towards another goal. I think the goal is financial empowerment and freedom. This is why we're here at the Freedom Forum. It's not the Bitcoin Forum. And so if other tools provide people financial empowerment and freedom, great. If someone can do something with their wallet that they couldn't otherwise do using something like a stable coin, that's not an enemy for me.
Walk us through. So go back. How many years ago? 3 years ago, you said you added support for Tether. Walk us through a little bit that decision process, both your personal decision-making process as well as just the decision-making process in Bitrefill, because it is a big step in the direction of becoming something other than purely a Bitcoin company. Like what factors did you consider? Why did you decide to make that decision at that time when volumes were quite low?
We get customer requests and we process them through our own proprietary bullshit filter and look at, again, on-chain activity transactional data, say, process that through some kind of proprietary bullshit filter and try to determine where is their actual activity, and then we go there. I think what we've seen is that like Bitrefill alone can't. We're not big enough on our own to make a cryptocurrency fly. Like just us is not enough, right? So
when Bitrefill coin, sorry.
Well, yeah,
never.
I think the point is that like we look at where is there an economy forming a little bit, and then we see if we want to support that.
You must have gotten some pushback from Bitcoiners, people in the Bitcoin community. Can you share a little bit what that has been like, how you've responded to it, or haven't you?
To be honest, I don't know. Like if Bitcoiners push back so much about stablecoins, they push back more about Ethereum, for example, right? You sensed it in the room, right? There was a certain wind that went. You
said the E word.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of stablecoins, I mean, I think everyone's discovering, even like, you know, we have a lot of other solutions that provide stable value. We have things like Strike. We have things like, you know, the Bitcoin Beach wallet, Chiva wallet, and so on. Like, it adds a lot of value. And all of those always introduce counterparty risk, trust. All of these things that we kind of don't want, but it seems very clearly that the market is willing to live with these downsides, and I think it's going to be the case until the volatility of Bitcoin reaches such a low point that Bitcoin in itself becomes a stable coin, which I think is...
It's kind of been that way recently.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be all that far off. Like, volatility is decreasing, and I think we will, in some foreseeable future, have a world where, you know, your Bitcoin was worth 10 a couple of months ago, and now it's worth 10.10. All right, great, whatever. Right? I mean, it just has to be good enough. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect.
I want to drill down a tiny bit on the risks point. You mentioned risks a couple times. You mentioned counterparty risk. You know, there's kind of two categories of risk here. And in my experience, people aren't always really good at classifying and quantifying risk. And I think this is the root of a lot of, I don't know, a lot of debates that we've had about these choices we have to make when we figure out the financial tools we're going to use. So in the case of Bitcoin, the risk is not a security risk per se. It's more of the volatility risk. It's more of a, I don't know what you want to call it, like a sort of a FX exposure risk. I mean, obviously, we love it if it goes up. We hate it when it goes down, right? So if you're putting your life savings in Bitcoin and you need to touch it in the next 5 years, then it might not.
Well, I mean, look, it's like a common topic, like talking to Bitcoin companies that have received investment, and it's like, how do you keep that investment? Like, do you keep all of it in Bitcoin? No, okay. Some of it? Okay, great. Where do you keep the rest? And so on. And then for the rest, you're going to have counterparty risk, different kinds. And there's always that. I mean, like, I think we're learning that. And with Bitcoin, you know, like, it's a different set of trade-offs. Like, you will very likely always have your Bitcoins, but there is a meaningful chance that they drop 20% in value.
There's also a chance that you don't custody your keys properly.
Sure. But that's kind of like equal across many different solutions.
But then let's look at the other side as well, because it is interesting to ask I mean, we touched upon this before, what are the risks of things like stablecoins? So broadly speaking, just it's super like simplified stablecoin 101, there's like two buckets, two types of stablecoins. There's kind of asset-backed stablecoins, and there's what are called algorithmic stablecoins. Asset-backed stablecoins, they can be crypto asset-backed, they can be kind of fiat asset-backed. I guess we're also now looking at certain projects doing real-world assets. So they could be backed theoretically by something like property or stocks or bonds or something like that. In that case, you have a lot of counterparty risk, which you mentioned a couple times, right? So like Tether is a company, it's a centralized issuer that claims that for every dollar of Tether coin or token that they issue, they have a dollar or a dollar equivalent in a bank account somewhere. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but you just kind of Google Tether and you'll very quickly find, it's kind of like, what is that collection, the Bitcoin obituaries? There's kind of a probably at least as large collection of articles talking about Tether obituaries, about how it hasn't been as transparent as it could be, and there have been some accounting anomalies and things like that. But it's still around, and a lot of people rely on it. In fact, it's gained in dominance recently in the wake of some of the US regulatory issues. And then the other bucket is these algorithmic stablecoins, which have largely fallen out of favor since the collapse of Terra Luna, which of course was like the biggest algorithmic stablecoin, and there's some serious flaws in a lot of those designs. So yeah, I mean, just risks.
But
There's risks anywhere you go.
Yeah, and there too, you have technical risks. Like, did you verify the algorithm? Like, can you trust it? How, like, there's no such thing as risk-free. Even like, holding keys in a wallet. Like we had last week. Users of the Atomic wallet. They had their keys, they had the custody, and so on. Something happened. Wallet pushed an update. All the coins are gone. And so, like, if you have your keys on a mobile phone wallet and you have automatic updates, it's like, yeah, well, there is a chance, I guess, that the company that makes the wallet might get compromised and send a bad update, and then your coins are gone. So there's always different kinds of trust. It's not literally trusting someone to keep money for you, but you still have, some kind of technological trust. And like most of us are not savvy enough to verify source code and even to just compile to see that it's the same as the source code in the GitHub or whatever.
I hear you, and I don't disagree, but still, as a cypherpunk, I would much rather put my faith in cryptography and code than in people, right? So, like, given this impossible choice,
sure, but 10 billion people in the world are going to put their faith, I guess, in you and in other cypherpunks.
But that's it. We need networks of trust. It may not be the case that 10 billion people, 8 billion people, whatever, can audit the source code themselves, but arguably they can find someone who can, or they can, I don't know, outsource that trust somehow to someone within their network who can. I think that's kind of my vision of how things might work. So final question on this topic, and then we can maybe talk about the Tornado Cash side. How do you guys think, we're talking about risk here, we're talking about, challenges of people kind of custodying their funds. How does this impact your business at Bitrefill? Is it something that you feel that you need to communicate to your users, educate your users about these various types of risks? Do you feel users are very kind of sophisticated with respect to understanding the risks of these different choices? Sorry, that's a mouthful.
It's a big question, and like, education-wise, some of the things that we found, like, for example, looking at which wallets people use, and it's like the wallets that are most popular are not the wallets that are usually recommended by famous Bitcoin thought leaders, and why is that, and so on. So, like, at some point, like, education is very valuable, but there's also the dynamic that people are just going to do whatever they want. And in some way, and both of these things are true. Like, education is worthwhile, but people are still going to not listen. That's, the story of Bitcoin. Like, who has the perfect setup? Nobody. At some point, everybody pretends that they do, right? But like,
I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect setup. I think it really depends on your personal situation. But there's a lot of people in this room and at this event who are much more knowledgeable than me on this topic, and I do encourage you to, there was a great session yesterday on privacy and how to kind of use technologies like Bitcoin privately. I learned a lot there. I really encourage folks here who are cognizant of this, who care about this, and this should be all of us, to start those conversations, kind of compare notes, ask other people what works for them, what kind of custody solutions, security solutions, privacy solutions work for them.
And just, I guess, to plug, but like, it doesn't matter how great on-chain privacy you have. If your Bitcoins come from a bank and go back to a bank, then like, they need to start circulating. Like, we need to grow the economy of Bitcoin, and it is growing. And things like
you guys are playing a big role in that, so thank you for that.
Yeah, we try. I wish there was more. Yeah, the goal isn't to be such a dominant part of it over time.
So we kind of have touched upon privacy, so let's now talk a little bit about Tornado Cash. I think this is another tool that many people in this community, many activists around the world have relied on historically. So kind of by way of background, Tornado Cash is something called a mixer, which, versions of this exist both in the Bitcoin world as well as in the Ethereum world, probably other ecosystems as well. There are others, but it was the most popular one in the Ethereum world. So the rough idea here is if you have coins in a wallet, whether that's in a UTXO-based system like Bitcoin or an account-based system like Ethereum, there's some nuances, some differences there, but at a high level, it's kind of the same idea. You want to break what's called linkability, right? So if you want to spend those coins and you don't want third parties to be able to kind of surveil all of those transactions and kind of track where your money's coming from, where it's going. We don't need to name them and shame them, but there are a number of organizations that kind of build proprietary technologies to do this. One very strong tool in the privacy toolbox. By no means the only tool, but one very powerful tool is something called a mixer. And the idea is, and by the way, shout out as well to like Wasabi Wallet, Samurai Wallet. You folks are doing amazing work in the Bitcoin world. There's mixers built in to those wallets, and there are some things like this in Ethereum as well. They basically kind of use technologies like Wabi Sabi and CoinJoin, and there's again variants of this in the Ethereum world, but you kind of mix your coins together with coins from other people, and then use things like zero knowledge proofs in the case of Tornado Cash, wait a period of time. So it aggregates a bunch of coins, a bunch of transactions together, and then you remove those coins from the pool, the shared pool, after that period of time using a zero knowledge proof. And then in the ideal world, if you've done everything correctly, and it's not super straightforward, but these wallets help, then you've effectively broken the linkability between that coin having come from your wallet. So yeah, there's a lot to say about Tornado Cash, but I'll just jump to the conclusion here. So about 8 months ago, yeah, 8 months ago,
something happened.
10 months ago, yeah. Tornado Cash was added to the OFAC sanctions list. I'm sure most folks here will probably have heard of this happening. And this is a really big deal for a lot of reasons. The most interesting reason in my mind is that they added not the kind of names of individual persons, not the kind of, and previously like Bitcoin and Ethereum addresses had been added to the OFAC sanctions list that were associated with persons and companies. In this case, they actually added something like 10 smart contract addresses. And these smart contracts are, of course, autonomous software. The developers do not control the keys. They don't control those accounts. This may be unconstitutional. There are, amazing legal minds who are working on bringing this to court. I do hope it kind of makes it, as far as the Supreme Court or something. So we'll see what happens. But the sad outcome is that it is now, as of when these sanctions were announced, illegal for U.S. persons or people who do business in or with the United States to use Tornado Cash. Of course, there have been mixers in the Bitcoin world as well that have also been sanctioned. And that, to the extent that Tornado Cash and apps like it are uncensorable smart contracts, like the back end, the smart contract still exists on Ethereum, and it's still possible to interact with it. There are various decentralized front ends that exist in places like IPFS. But of course, the transaction volume has fallen substantially, and there are risks associated with that. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a snapshot. Do you have any thoughts on privacy in general or mixers specifically? Or how does it impact your business? Or worrying about sanctions? You said the sanctions is something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the interesting topic, is that it appears that the US is working really hard to make sure that American Bitcoin and cryptocurrency becomes separate from that in the rest of the world. Like, okay, now for example, you have Tornado Cash. It works everywhere except for the US. And that also means that companies, you have to at some point choose, and it makes it very hard, because like the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it's the same apps, the same things that you can use if you're a billionaire in the US and if you're a freedom fighter in Zimbabwe or whatever, right? And nowadays, obviously for companies, like obviously the US market is more profitable, right? But now the US market demands that like you don't more and more work with some of the other countries, which are some of the countries that need Bitcoin the most, right? It's the Cubas, the Venezuelas, and so on and such forth. And it's getting harder, and it's I think that's a very troublesome development in general. That I don't know, like where we're going to be, if we're going to end up with two separate Bitcoins or not. Probably not, but like to what extent? I guess they will be. They're already to some extent separated. But I think we're
Are we getting a time signal? Do we? Okay, great. So maybe we'll do one or two quick questions. I'm going to get in a final word, which is privacy matters. Privacy is a fundamental human right. It's something that we should all be sitting up and paying attention to. If you don't care about it today, you will likely care about it in the future. You should care about it today. And if we're not sort of paying attention and these technologies and tools are taken away from us, then it's going to be too late. Yeah, privacy is not illegal. That's my final word. Do you want to get a final word in?
No, that's a great final word.
The topic is not privacy, but we can always bring it back to privacy.
Sure.
Maybe we'll do one or two quick questions. Does anyone have any audience questions?
Does anyone want to comment about the rhetoric around tainted addresses if they're put through mixes?
Yeah, this is probably relevant to your business. I'll just repeat the question for the sake of the recording. Any comments on like tainted addresses or addresses that may be blacklisted or have transacted with a blacklisted address? And this impacts the fungibility of Bitcoin, which is what you were talking about a moment ago when you said there's 2 Bitcoins.
Yeah, and I guess the big question is whether or not coin joins should be seen as tainted, because what if you're coin joining with someone bad and so on? I think
the sad reality is they are in some cases, which is crazy because
but it depends.
It's very hard to comply with sanctions, and the penalties are so severe that a lot of companies act just very conservatively, right? And they, for example, will not transact with addresses that have been through mixers and coin joins.
Which is yet another reason to rely less on financial institutions, because they have to follow these things. Whereas things that if you use your Bitcoin to buy a Snickers, they're not obliged to follow sanctions laws.
And by the way, kudos to you guys. I know that you are able to operate with some degree of freedom here with BitRefill because of the nature of your business.
Because we're not a financial institution.
Exactly. But
we're a store.
Kudos to you guys for not requiring KYC when it's not required. I think that's an important service you're doing to this community, and you are respecting privacy.
We try. But yeah, it's a battle. Is that the honk?
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for listening.
Fun conversation. Thank you.
Hello? All right. Check. Okay, here we are. All right. We're going to keep it moving here. This next talk is called Off-Grid Activism. So more than 600 million people lack electricity. You guys can take a load off, relax. More than 600 million people lack electricity in Africa. The impact this has on education, commerce, human development, and activism is incalculable. One company has realized they can take advantage of the plentiful, renewable energy resources in the region and use Bitcoin mining to finance off-grid decentralized power. Today, we're going to hear from the founders on why this will have an impact on civil society. So I'd like to welcome Janet Maingi and Eric Hersman from Gridless. So let's give them a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Is anyone here? Okay. So as Gridless, our goal is to actually mine Bitcoin. Our mission is to push the electrification of Africa right to the edge. So that's really what Gridless does. Okay. So this is an example of a typical site where we'd work from in Africa. This is somewhere in the villages in Malawi. So our focus is really in rural Africa, not the Nairobis, Lagos, where you already have the power grid that's in place. You have options of how to electrify your home. Our focus is more on the rural homes that are not able to get power. And as mentioned earlier, when you talk about over 100 million homes that don't have electricity, two-thirds of those homes are actually in Africa. This is typical of what you'd see in a village in Africa, unlike what we have here where we have the daylight savings. In Africa, when the sun goes down, darkness checks in. So we don't have a gradual cutoff. It's 6 p.m. and becomes pitch dark. And so if you look at the photo on the screen, you can see a small, what we call a kiosk, or a small shop within the village. And they need electricity to be able to continue selling their commodities to the community. And then you can see what a typical power installation looks like in rural homes in Africa, or a shop. Basically a single bulb just to be able to charge your phone and keep the life going. And then of course, what you can see also is what a kiosk looks like. So this is a small shop. And again, it's just a bulb that they need to be able to still sell their commodities and earn their keep. Letitia is a lady in Malawi, and this is now somebody who is a bit more advanced, where you can see electricity. has allowed her to own a television, own a refrigerator, be able to have a kettle to boil water, and have a radio. This is not typical in rural homes in Africa. So most of the people are just excited if they can just get one bulb powered on in their homes. And so we look at it as Gridless, we looked at energy is the base layer of human progress because one, grades become better. When you talk about grades, I'll give a bit of context. Most of these homes, children study using paraffin lamps, right? That is such a high risk when it comes to either if you hit it, it topples, there's a fire in the home. Or secondly, they have to inhale the fumes as they continue doing their assignments. So with electricity or a single bulb in your home, then you know their grades get better because they're able to focus on what is really keeping them in school. Health improves because then again, we don't have somebody inhaling fumes. Security gets better because then again, the streets are lit. You should be able to walk through peacefully. You don't expect somebody to nudge you into a dark corner. And then overall productivity goes up because if children are being able to do their assignments, get through with their education, you have a shopkeeper who is able to run his shop late until 9 p.m., which means he's able to sell a bit more. Then overall productivity goes up in these communities. So what you see on the screen is 1.1 billion the population of 1.1 billion within the world where there's no electricity, and where 600 million of these people are in Africa. So if you look at the picture on the screen, you can see majority of where there's no electricity is in Africa. And this is just access. We're not talking about reliability. We're not talking about affordability. We're just talking about access, a single bulb powering on in your home.
All right, I'll take over for a second here. So a lot of people ask us what we do with mining, and I wanted to bring, because I know there's a few people here who are activists and not everybody has even seen a miner. So Christian, a local guy here in Oslo, brought us a miner so we could just have one here so people could see it, and if anybody wants to come up afterwards, we'll have it out behind. So if you want to come see what a miner is, how it works, we can talk to you about it, okay? This is a very old one. Like most people don't use these anymore. It's an S9. But how do we do it, right? So when we go to a village, the basic idea is this, right? You have a river coming down. This is a run-of-river site. It takes off some of the water into a generator and a turbine. That then powers homes. It also powers maize mills or the local phone tower, maybe a tea factory. And then everything that's excess, we use for Bitcoin mining. So what does it look like in the real world, right? So this is the first site we did mining at. This is the first powerhouse in Kenya. This is a 50 kilowatt site. And you can see we just had about 20 kilowatts of miners in there. So each miner takes about 3 kilowatts of energy. We have 6 of them in the turbine room. They just sit there and run 24/7. The beauty of it, I think this is what people are just now starting to understand about energy and Bitcoin mining, is, I'm going to jump forward to this, is this. So this is actually the real data averaged out over a year for the community in Malawi. So you can see there's little spikes along the way, but in the evening there's a big spike in the need for energy. What happens is the power company that we've partnered with, they don't make any money right here until we walk in with Bitcoin miners and we soak up all that excess energy, all that wasted energy. So what we do, though, is we do what's called real-time demand leveling. So whether there's less water coming in on the supply side or there's more energy being used by the community, we automatically shut down machines and turn them back on. So it can do that in an automated way and makes us so much more efficient. It makes the grid stronger, and more importantly, it makes the power provider financially sustainable for the first time ever. Almost all of these mini grids have never been financially sustainable, and now they can be. So what we do isn't really sexy. We work inside powerhouses with turbines and generators. We put up connectivity so that our miners can speak to the Bitcoin network. And we put in Bitcoin miners, which are what? Really dumb machines, right? They're really simplified computers. These simplified computers change the way that energy can work in Africa. So the grid has gone about, the national grids have gone about as far as they will go. So the only way to push electrification further is through small power houses and mini grids. Okay, but what we also wanted to talk about was, for activists, what can you actually do with this, right? This is about the Oslo Freedom Forum. It's people trying to make change in their part of the world. How do we do that, right? So you've got off-grid activism and off-grid money available to you. Is there any reason why an activist couldn't buy or find or get donated one of these machines to help them get their own money? So we think that there's a way, and this is a riff off of a blog post from a couple years ago called Mining for the Streets. You can look it up. And what it is, it's how do you use your energy bill, right? How do you pay for your energy by putting a Bitcoin miner in your home and using that as your non-KYC option to get Bitcoin, okay? And that's something special, because if you're sitting in one of these environments that is very hostile, so I grew up in Sudan and Kenya, right? So in Sudan, you would find it a hostile environment to try and use your money if you're trying to do anything that is considered activism to the regime. So you need resistance money, right? So this is money that isn't assailable by corporations or the government, by the state. How do you get that? Is there a way to turn your fiat money into Bitcoin? Is there a way to earn it yourself? And we think there is.
So in conclusion, we do believe that Bitcoin is the tool that will actually allow for a level playground when it comes to financial freedom. Now, when you're getting started, these are some of the things you would need in your home. A power outlet, it could be 220 volts or 110 volts, depending on where you're in the world. A Bitcoin miner, so one of this type. And again, we're trying to keep this as basic as possible. So something to dampen the sound. So the miners are quite loud. They sound like bees buzzing. So for the sake of peace in your home.
Or a jet landing.
Or a jet landing. So for the sake of peace in your home, it would be good to have something just to dampen the sound. And this is just like a cooler box. And then, of course, you need like some basic Ethernet connection. So it's not data intensive, just enough to be able to connect to the mining pools that allow you to mine Bitcoin. The additional tools, of course, you'll need is what I've mentioned, the pools. So these ones do regular payouts to you based on your contribution to the larger the mining community. And these are examples. So you can use linkcoin.com, you can use Luxor, or you can use ckpool.com. And then, of course, there's a question of where do you buy the miner. So being conscious that, as Eric has mentioned, some of this equipment is quite expensive. There are certain markets that exist that have been verified. So again, you avoid being scammed, where you might buy a miner and receive a loaf of bread, maybe. So yes, there's Hardware Markets channel, and then there's Kaboom Tracks on Telegram. And then beyond that, of course, being activists, and of course we're in a bigger society, I'm sure we'll be able to get somebody who will be able to donate a machine or two for you to be able to start this out. So if you feel like walking down this unsexy path, as Eric has shown, we go up very strange electricity poles, and you feel that you're ticking all the boxes when you come to the tools that you need, we are willing to work with you. And so for an activist who's ready for this, we'll be able to donate 2 miners to you and get you started, and hopefully be able to generate your own financial freedom without relying on anybody. Thank you.
So if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer a couple questions until our time's up. I'm not sure how much time we have. About 3 to 5 minutes? Okay. So if any questions, please just holler them at us. KG? Which power sources? So we're very fortunate in Africa that we have a ton of renewable energy, and we're seeing more and more hydro come online in Uganda, Ethiopia, Congo, Zambia, Ghana. There's a lot of hydro coming online. So I think the majority of the energy will still be hydro. And we're also seeing some others, so geothermal in certain areas in Kenya and Ethiopia, and then, but the prime growth is solar, right? So solar has become massive and is like 95% of the mini grids. It's not great for a return on investment with Bitcoin mining. That might change in the future, but it's not quite the right energy source yet. So solar is, because we have such good sunlight all over Africa, it's really easy to deploy no matter where you are. If you're trying to do hydro, by its nature, you have to be close to a good water that has enough velocity or drop in order to spin a turbine. So and same with wind. There's only pockets of areas that are really good for wind. And geothermal is even more specific, right? So solar can be almost anywhere and be effective in Africa.
But from a commercial perspective, I think why Eric is saying the return on investment is not as friendly is because then you have about 8 hours of sun, which means then you have to start thinking about how do you store this power to be able to continue running your mining 24 hours, unlike hydro, which runs 24 hours. But for the homes, it works pretty well because they come with very simple battery packs that are able to power on the homes until about 10 p.m.
We got one here. Our own operation, so gridless. Yeah, we have our 2 sites in Malawi and Kenya. We have another site coming online in Zambia in about 4 weeks. And then we have 2 more sites coming online in Kenya in probably, let's call it 8 to 10 weeks. So we're, scale-wise, we're petahash levels. We're not exahash guys. We obviously believe that there's more to be gained for the Bitcoin network and decentralizing it and doing horizontal scale rather than vertical scale. So you're going to see us always doing a lot more smaller sites, which of course isn't as efficient as the big miners who are just warehousing, 10,000, 100,000 miners in a single site. But we feel like that's not our mission, right? We have another mission. Sorry. All right, let me go up there first.
So for the communities, we are pretty coexisting peacefully because one of our, part of our business model is we only buy what is called the stranded power. So we don't go for what the community is actually using. And as Eric mentioned, based on the water levels, we're able to actually do demand leveling and ensure that we are not taking power that should be used by the consumer at that moment. And then for the community or consumers, they have only one purpose. Can I get a bulb lit? So we are coming in and being able to give the power operator a new lifeline when it comes to their plant being economically viable. For them, then they know this electricity is going to be available much more longer than what we thought. So their focus is, when you came here, are we getting electricity? Are you expanding to more homes, more than you're mining Bitcoin?
Let me give you some real data on what we do. So we go and we structure a very creative agreement with a power provider so that we are always the last buyer. So if anybody comes online and needs that power, then we turn off machines. If it's turned off for long enough, we move the machine to some other site, okay? Secondarily, there's downstream effects, which is in Malawi, they had been unable, there's 800 families who wanted to get power, but because the power provider didn't have enough financial sustainability, they weren't even able to buy the meters to turn on the next couple hundred homes. So we came in, signed the agreement, they were finally able to buy those meters, and now 200 more families have electricity than had it before. In Kenya, what happened was the downstream effect was because we came in and made and used the whole amount of energy that was being created, they were able to lower the price for the community for power. So there's some really interesting downstream effects that we don't actually control ourselves, but our power partner does. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wait. Okay, go there first.
How do you balance the incentive model of when maybe Bitcoin is worth a lot more than the local currency, that you don't just start putting more and more miners in and start soaking up that electricity. I understand you're saying that you've got contracts where you are the last buyer. So are you just undercutting, I guess, what the local rate is? You're always less?
No, we do a revenue share. So the power partner gets 30% of the Bitcoin that we mine, and we get 70%. So we're all incentivized for the same thing. How are we doing time? Okay, one more question. So wait, who hasn't asked a question before I go to UKG? Okay, we'll go there. Okay, so as Janet knows too, we have not had to even do exhaust fans on our containers. So we actually don't have a problem with heat because we're at high enough elevations. We're in the highlands. That will change as we get to some of the new energy sources. But for now, we haven't even had to add that. So the heat hasn't been a major issue. We've had other problems. If I had more time, I was going to put in like how all the bugs got into our machines, and it took us like 3 days to clean out all the bugs with toothbrushes. We've had people cut down power poles to get access to the battery that has the repeater signal in it for the internet. We've had other issues, but heat hasn't been one of them. Are we good? One more? Thank you guys. Okay. All right. Thank you guys.
Yeah, obviously the dream of civil society organizations being able to have power that the government can't cut off combined with internet is very appealing. So it's really cool to get that fresh perspective. One thing before Ben is going to announce the next session, we're going to have a surprise closing session today at 5:20. Adam Back, the CEO of Blockstream, will join us for like kind of a community Q&A about cypherpunk values. So that's going to be really fun. That'll close us out. And I turn it over to Ben to announce the next session.
All right. Get that clicker here. All right, here we go. Okay, so this next session, it is called Global Financial Inclusion. Most of today's financial systems rely on credit. Credit requires trust. You need to trust that someone will pay you back. Credit is gatekept and exclusionary. You must be identified to use the system. Bitcoin and Lightning, on the other hand, are not credit instruments, nor are they liabilities. They are bearer instrument digital assets. Recipients don't need to have a registered account with a company, nor do they need to prove anything about themselves. So today we're going to hear two collaborating entrepreneurs from different sides of the planet talk about this new kind of financial inclusion. Let's welcome Jack and Abubakar.
All right, what's going on, Oslo? Yeah, we're in a sauna this year. My name's Jack. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Strike. I've been working on Bitcoin for over a decade, and I'm beyond excited to be here. I'd like to quickly first thank the Human Rights Foundation. You guys do an incredible job every single year. I personally believe Bitcoin is a tool for human rights and human empowerment and human flourishing, and it's an honor to be here. And one of the reasons I'm so excited is I get to host a conversation with one of the coolest guys I've ever met. And so with that, if you want to introduce yourself, and we'll start talking about money.
Sure. Like Jack said, I'm pretty excited to see a huge crowd. Last year was very interesting, and it's good to see the numbers growing, and it's good to see the conversations maturing. So yeah, I'll get into it. My name is Abubakar. I'm CEO and CTO of a company called Recursive Capital. We're a Bitcoin VC, the only Bitcoin VC in the African continent, so we see quite a bit of the things happening on the continent on multiple fronts. I'm also a Bitcoin Core contributor, so I help write and review code to the Bitcoin Core network. I also run a program called Gala, where we train existing African developers to become Bitcoin developers. And then lastly, I'm on a board of B-Trust, where we're trying to grow the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yeah, just really trying to help out on dev funding and everything.
Yeah, TLDR, he's a pretty cool dude. Yeah. So, okay, one of the things I think would be interesting for a wider audience to know about our relationship and what we talk about, we're similar in age, similar interests, we listen to the same music, we're great friends, we're homies, and we communicate over the internet fairly freely, sometimes on Signal, sometimes we're on Twitter, sometimes we're on Noster.
A good mix.
But we talk. The one thing that's vastly different in our lives is our relationship with money.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we both like Jay-Z, but I don't interface with the Naira, and a lot of what goes on in Western African countries or just the continent in general. And you obviously don't know what it's like to be an American.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more widely understood, the American story, the American dream, Chase Bank, what it's like to have an Amex credit card. I don't think people generally appreciate your viewpoint, relationship with money, why you have the career you have. And so I think we should start by giving context on what firstly got you into Bitcoin, which is your relationship with currency and with money and with payment networks.
Oh yeah, definitely. And to give more context, so for us to hit up my title subscription as a Nigerian is extremely difficult. So typically, all Nigerians know this in the crowd or who will be probably listening. You have to switch between multiple providers for either a virtual card because the Naira cards don't work. An interesting thing that people should know about Nigeria is people often dog about Bitcoin's fungibility and how, you know, it's not fungible, quote unquote. But it's ironic because in Nigeria, we have 4 Nairas, essentially. We have the e-Naira, we have the Naira in accounts, which are very different. And then we have 2 instances of physical notes, both the old notes and the new notes. The reason why we have a lot of that breakage, really, when it comes to fungibility is because of failed economic policies, a difficulty when it comes to monetary policy actually being effective, given the majority of money is outside banks in Nigeria, which is why they did the redesign for the Naira notes to kind of bring that back in. But yeah, just to cut it short, in all honesty, the thing with money in Nigeria is typically you're exposed to how broken money is in Nigeria, which is why Bitcoin has remained fully grassroots. So it's typically a case of not being able to make payments when you're overseas, even in Nigeria. So it's the thing of a lot of people have started to realize that it's best to have all your money in Bitcoin, or at least the majority of your money in Bitcoin, and then step out when you necessarily have to, because the best medium for us to transfer our wealth, transport it across borders, and also just off-ramp freely.
So why do you think that is? Generally speaking, unless a human has really malicious intent, no one desires to give people awful experiences. But you're describing, and I've gotten to know, pretty terrible experiences that you've had to live with. Why? What's the problem?
It's, again, money is like a historical human problem to begin with. But one thing I've noticed, like even speaking with you and other folks from other jurisdictions, is that sometimes things add up over time when it comes to either economic policies or just geopolitical considerations that not a lot of people tend to pay attention to. So for example, in Nigeria, we tend to be locked off of a lot of financial services, whether it's like TransferWise or some other thing. It usually has to do with the risk that people see with having Nigerians. So creditworthiness has a lot to do with that to a certain extent, as well as this conception of like Nigerians being fraudsters or like always having an angle, coming to a place, dominating, often doing kind of like stuff like that. But then the challenge becomes what now happens to a Farida, a Zainab, a Taiwo in Nigeria, who honestly, they're just trying to make a better living. And they're usually the population that gets the brunt of all these issues when it comes to like broken money. So yeah, that's kind of the reason. It's a lot of considerations, really.
The credit problem is what you just... So I think we should spend a little bit explaining that in depth because it's more nuanced than people think. Before Bitcoin, in order to make a digital payment, it implies a sense of creditworthiness. The reason for that is there wasn't a physical form of digital money. Every time that you swiped a Visa card or you made a PayPal payment or you sent an international wire, it's a promise of future settlement. And that promise has to be held up. There is a reality that someone like Visa allows the swipe to be successful, but then the transaction ends up failing and the merchant doesn't get their money. And so that's a promise to a certain state in the future. And so the way payments have worked traditionally before something like Bitcoin is companies like Visa and banks and payment processors, they have to assess the creditworthiness of the person making that promise, right? Does that make sense? When I go send money across the world, or I go buy lunch, or I'm sending money to my friend, I'm constantly being assessed for how creditworthy am I to make good on the promise that I'm asking Visa to broker to the merchant, or to the individual on the other side of the world, or to my friend. That is the reason why financial services require so much of our information. I don't think Visa cares how tall I am or what color my eyes are. They want to know how creditworthy I am. Now, if you extrapolate that to a world that's rapidly moving to more decentralized and global, how feasible do you think it is for any company or any individual or any government to actively assess the creditworthiness of 8 billion people? It sounds like a fairly impossible problem. And so what we result with is a tremendous financial inclusion problem, because the reason that TransferWise may not want to serve you and your friends is not because they don't want your business. It's because they aren't confident in assessing your creditworthiness, which has nothing to do with money. It's just broken, is that we live in a digital world that's more decentral and global, and our money wasn't. Bitcoin fixes this, because when I send a message using Bitcoin that I want to pay someone, inside the message is the money itself. I don't need to assess the creditworthiness. Either the instrument is inside the message or it's not. Inside of a Visa message is a set of instructions and a set of creditworthiness details, like my credit score. Two entirely different things. And so for that reason, we can really make a lot of progress on financial inclusion, global payments, opening up new market opportunities. Like a company you've invested in, and my own company, we send instant, cheap cross-border payments with no reliance on creditworthiness. I don't need to know anything about anybody. So that is what you're alluding to, probably, right? And what you think. So what do you think that means for Nigeria, for Africa, for the world? Because where I come from, the kids I went to high school with don't have a clue what I just described. But inside of all of that is where the fees come from, where the intermediaries come from, where the privacy invasiveness comes from, of needing every amount of data about everything. And the reason that if you scale that out, guys, over 50 to 100 years, you get a really developed Western world that has Apple Pay and all these amazing things. And then you get a lot of the planet that's left behind. And that delta is due to really a fundamental problem in money not being natively digital. What do you think it solves? What it makes you interested in it? And how are you helping, acting, and developing on this stuff?
Yeah, like Jack said, it's one of those things. Typically, some of the conversations are like, oh, you know, I'm into drill. I like that artist, blah, blah, blah. Have you seen that thing? Well, as soon as you meet any African, I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience, is like, wait, how exactly am I supposed to pay? We're always inquisitive about exactly how other monetary systems work. Again, it all comes down to the fact that the whole creditworthiness system that's like baked into fiat is insanely converse, or should I say is insanely antithetical to the idea of bringing more people onto the system. Because think of it this way. All of this information that Jack was talking about that they require, not a lot of people typically have that. So the assumption already brings exclusion by definition. So even if you want to onboard people that truly need financial rails, it's actually impossible to do so. Because again, you're now talking about getting IDs, erecting new structures. So for a lot of people, it's simple. It's finding the best money that works for them. And where the vertical comes in, or at least the interesting thing with Bitcoin, is they found Bitcoin is the best money that works for them, which is why it's always going to be grassroots. It's always going to be people on the ground sticking to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the only money that actually serves them, honestly. So I think another thing really to consider is, especially when we're talking about financial inclusion in general, it's just the permissionless nature of Bitcoin's involvement, I guess, when it comes to being a money that really speaks to a lot of people at broad levels. So you don't have to be a developer to appreciate the fact that I don't need an ID. Bitcoin doesn't need to know, again, how tall I am, my eye color, what I like. All it needs is internet connection. And the cool thing with internet connection and internet infrastructure generally in Africa is it's very, very diverse, because Africa is a huge, huge continent. Each jurisdiction has its own issues or its own benefits. So typically you have to be arbitraging really exactly to see exactly what works in each jurisdiction. But again, I'm pretty hopeful given the fact that we have companies that we invested in like Fedi who are building federations that leverage existing trust models and bringing that into a space where you could operate on Lightning. So I think this is kind of why people are hungry and yearning for Bitcoin in Africa, and kind of why I guess it's always going to succeed. It's always going to be Bitcoin winning in the end because it's for and by the people.
Totally. It's really a remarkable concept. I do this sometimes when I have Zoom calls as like, this is a bearer instrument is what's described. It's a physical thing. I am 5'8" and I'm 150 pounds. I'm not nearly strong enough to throw this to Nigeria instantly and for free. So it's difficult for me to make a physical bearer transfer from Norway to Nigeria, Norway to Chicago. However, if you guys gave me a second and I reached in my pocket and grabbed my cell phone, I would be able to get a physical Bitcoin into Nigeria for less than a second and for free. And so then you don't got to trust me. Either you're going to get the physical bearer instrument or not. And we don't need eye scanning and IDs. Because you're right, it's an impossible uniform to place on humanity to assess everyone's creditworthiness actively. It changes a lot. Okay, on that, we talked a lot about payments. Financial inclusion is a very broad concept because the same issues that we're talking about extrapolated is just property rights and the ability to save and persist wealth that you earn, right? The monetary policy you mentioned before in Nigeria has been subpar, to say it politely. So talk about, like, when you think about financial inclusion, when you think about Bitcoin, and you think about inclusive, cash-settled, physical bearer, no need for credit payments network, and you think about saving and a bearer instrument that cannot be inflated or changed at all, where do you see Africa's interest? In both, in one? How do you see it play out? What's more important when you talk about financial inclusion and when you talk about freedom? We're at the Freedom Forum.
Damn, that's a, that's a long-ass question. Okay. So I like to think of it this way. So if you think about it, Bitcoin is really, really, like, definitionally speaking, it's hard money at the end of the day. And when I mean hard money, I mean like classic hard money. So for all the gold bugs in the crowd, what they thought or think gold is pretty much what Bitcoin is on like a 10x level, given the fact that it's digitally native, which for a lot of communities that are moving more into the digital realm, that's like a perfect bearer instrument. But I think another thing to consider about Bitcoin is the fact that Bitcoin is a versatile tool at the end of the day. So again, it serves all the purposes that you just described. Great savings tech, instant settlement, permissionless, I guess, monetary system where you could actually send remittances, so it's not sending a burger and getting peanuts at the other tunnel. So I think for Africans, the immediate benefits that we have from Bitcoin is that versatility, specifically around things like remittances, things around like payments in general, because payments are horrible. I mean, we have the best payment infrastructure between banks in Nigeria, but at the same time, banks get shut down all the time. Like, I had a bank account closed because someone sent me an amount and you put Bitcoin in the invoice and they're like, oh, cool, interesting.
Lost your creditworthiness, bro.
Unfortunately. But hey, we've got Bitcoin. So again, people move outside from, they start in with payments because that's naturally, I guess, the most immediate pain that you have when it comes to interacting with money. And then they move on to savings tech. Another interesting thing that's been happening in the last, I'd say maybe 18 months is the DCA culture. So for those that don't know, it's dollar cost averaging. So instead of trying to game the market, which a lot of people in Nigeria unfortunately still do, where you get burnt because honestly you need a lot of information to really arbitrage some of these markets, it's a case of having a small amount over a frequency of time, so maybe like $10 a week or maybe a month. And what they've come to realize is that's a better long-term strategy for preserving wealth and also wealth generation itself and creation, which is kind of a huge problem on the continent that I think Bitcoin is really, really providing a huge beneficial solution for. So yeah, I'd say definitely payments and then savings tech comes along.
And I think it's more broadly known at this point that Africa is a leader in Bitcoin adoption, Bitcoin evangelism, really like building a culture like you just described. It's a tool that solves real problems today. It's far less speculative, and it's more like a painkiller than a vitamin, right? And so speaking on the culture in Africa, I had a chance to visit. I went to the Africa Bitcoin Conference. It was amazing. I'm going to go again this year. I recommend everyone that has an opportunity to check it out. It was phenomenal. And I got to experience the culture myself. One of the most interesting takeaways was this concept that in Africa, African countries, typically, in order to really develop innovation and build tooling and build technology and disrupt, at a certain scale, you need permission from the West. There's this really, I'm trying to figure out a polite way to say it, interesting relationship that these countries have with the IMF, with the World Bank, and access to resources, access to funds, obviously a history of poor monetary policy at the central bank level. And you, among others in the continent, have described to me that Bitcoin is permissionless innovation, is that the amount of progress and the amount of culture and the amount of problem solving is something that's really rarely ever seen because you don't need to ask and get permission. Talk to me about what that means for hope, what that means for freedom, and what that means to the continent, or specifically your country, Nigeria.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a concept that I think has started gaining ground in some of the Bitcoin thought spaces across Africa. It's, again, back to your point about the IMF. It's so funny to me because people talk about developmental economics, and then the number one recommended model is aid-based economies. And if I just do a random poll here, how many of you know any economies that have developed from aid-based economies? Exactly, crickets. So I don't know why we still pretend that it works. So I think, again, Bitcoin is really, really special on a geopolitical level for Africa. Why? Because, again, it's permissionless development. Think of it this way. I was all the way in Kaduna, for goodness sake, like in my room. All I had was an internet connection. And I was able to get myself to contribute to the network, get the ability to actually have a money that works for me, able to send payments any single where I could. And the interesting thing is, like, there are very, very few barriers for you to get into Bitcoin, other than like an internet connection. And for me, it's super novel, really, to think about it, given the fact that all the trends in Africa when it comes to development around electrification and all that either help in terms of getting more people into Bitcoin or are being, catalyzed by Bitcoin. Think electrifying communities using Bitcoin mining. So again, for us, we finally have an opportunity where we have a money that works for us, a money that is able to actually bring about social and economic progress to the continent. And all of that, we do not need anybody's permission. F the IMF, F everyone else. All we have is Bitcoin.
And you, very impressively, were able to raise a bunch of money and work with people like one of our favorite rappers, Jay-Z, and one of my heroes in Jack Dorsey, in order to put money where your mouth is and actually seek out. So you have a particular interest in funding developers, which I think is really interesting and why you decided that. And you are an early stage venture fund, and that you actually are trying to support business locally. Talk to me about that, how you want to see Africa flourish, where you think it needs investment. What's the difference between a venture investment and investing in an open source developer for maybe folks that are new to a lot of this stuff? How do you see it all?
Yeah, okay, I'll start from the end and then walk my way back. So the thing to think about is there's a huge pipeline generally in any ecosystem, and it's not different in Bitcoin. So when we're talking about the Bitcoin ecosystem, typically we have different areas. So we have the mining side, we have developers. A lot of that still interacts with the entrepreneurs that make the companies, that people have these tools that work for them. But when it comes to evaluating like companies versus developers, it's very, very different. Because on the VC side, while I might be looking at a company thinking business model, returns in the future, how sustainable, for a developer, there's no immediate return. It's more so understanding the fact that they plug into the system at a very, very fundamental level. It's a case of making sure funding goes to the right amount of devs, building on the right amount of tools, really. So projects like Bitcoin Core, BDK, all of that helps devs and both the Bitcoin network as a whole. But that is very, very different in terms of how you assess.
Yeah, but just in layman's terms, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So I know why, but I want you to tell the world why. Because if someone like Jay-Z gave me a bunch of money to invest, I'd want to invest in the best companies. I'd buy Tesla stock. Why is there an interest in funding open source development with no expectation of return? Why is that important to the continent? Why is that important to your mission, how you see Bitcoin? You talk a lot about a specific interest of having Nigeria and Africa have developers that are part of the future of money.
Yeah, for sure. So again, it's the reason why you want to support open source development in general is because the entire ecosystem is built on top of open source. So at the end of the day, we could be funding, again, from Recursive Capital, all these crazy, cool Bitcoin companies, but at the end of the day, if the health and integrity of the actual open source tools that enables everyone to build on is lacking or frankly mismanaged, then there's really nothing for us at that level to fund. So with BTrust, really the thinking is Bitcoin has no central authorities, which is great, but it's not so exciting or as helpful when you think about it in terms of community or at least global-led efforts of coordination, whether it's marketing or even just funding. So for us, BTrust is the hope really, and the vision is for it to sit as an organization that's able to support the health and integrity of the open source ecosystem while providing that pipeline for everyone else, whether it's the VC side or developers, to come across and then benefit from all that health that comes with, I guess, funding developers and all of that. So that's really the reason why you'd want to. And why, you might ask, you'd want to bet on Nigeria or like Africa in general. Two reasons I typically say, which is essentially at the core of Recursive Capital's thesis. It's Africa is going to be the dev hub, or already starting to see that, of the entire Bitcoin development ecosystem for a lot of reasons. Primarily, we need Bitcoin the most, in my opinion. And secondly, the other reason is because of the unique challenges we face in Africa, the use cases that Bitcoin really professes or provides benefits to people that actually use it is going to be on the continent. So naturally, the majority of really, really good Bitcoin companies will likely come out of Africa. So that's why really you'll be thinking about in Africa in terms of that.
Totally. All right, how are we doing on time? All right, can I have one more question?
Yeah, just like closing statements, last questions. Yeah, wrap up. Yeah, and then we'll do our little thing. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do our little thing. I got one more question for you. We're at the Freedom Forum. We're at a Human Rights Foundation conference. Freedom, you think, like foundational human rights is that around half the world is oppressed, and their human liberties and human rights are taken from them against their choice and against their will. And when you think about how that's even possible, you think of things like freedom of speech and limiting the ability to have honest, open journalism, freedom of speech, public discourse. I don't think people understand money's role in a functioning society. Money is a technology that humanity invented in order to have a functioning, scalable society. And if the money can be controlled and co-opted, it is a very obvious and active way to severely oppress a country, a region, an individual. And so, as it relates to Africa, what does Bitcoin mean to freedom, to close it out, to you, to your country, to the continent? And if you were at a Freedom Forum in Oslo, what would you say to the world?
Ooh, great question. So, I mean, honestly, again, when we're thinking about freedoms, it's not a case of Bitcoin, as soon as you have Bitcoin, you have freedom immediately. It's really about the protection it gives to your freedom, because at the end of the day, rights and all of these things are really embedded in human beings. It's more about protecting it as opposed to just imbibing rights in general. So with Bitcoin, it's a case of economic freedom is at the heart of a lot of freedoms in general, which is typically why you see oppressive regimes attack economic freedom. Because at the end of the day, once you do that, you pretty much don't have political power, which, again, feeds into why they start attacking that. But for Africa, I think the interesting thing with Bitcoin is, again, because it's the money that works and because it's the money that protects financial freedom, which is the biggest thing at risk globally across multiple jurisdictions, it's a case of having this novel tool for the first time, which basically has zero, I guess, cost for you to come on board, where it's able to protect your financial freedom at the end of the day. So it's one of those things where great for saving, great for payments, and great for protecting your financial freedom in the long run. So it's really like a shield for everyone in Africa, which is why I think is always going to resonate, because there are a lot of repressive regimes all across the continent, but the one thing we can always bet on is Bitcoin.
Amazing. Well, thank you, brother. It's an honor. Follow this man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. Yeah, you could stay there for a second. We'll do this together. Jack has a special little announcement, which I think will be pretty well received. Before we do that, I just want to say the next hour is going to be extremely exciting. We're going to be hearing from Farida Nabourema, Jeff Booth. We're going to hear from Elizabeth Stark and Mike Brock and Adam Back. So it's going to be a fun hour. It's going to be a fun hour. But before that, yeah, what do you got, Jack?
Yeah, no, nothing too big. My company, we care deeply about human freedom, human flourishing. I personally actively have been working on that through Bitcoin for the last 10 years of my life. I'm a big donor through the company and personally in a lot of these efforts. I think the Human Rights Foundation is phenomenal. I think the cross-section between freedom fighting and freedom money is very natural. It needs more attention and it needs more resources. And so last year we donated 100 grand to you guys for an effort of BTC Pay Server, and we're going to repeat the donation and do it again. And so I'm Alex. I think you're a genius. I think you don't get enough credit, man. And
thank you, brother. We will put the funds to very good use, and we will collaborate with BTrust and others, and we'll make sure that the legacy of Mahasen and many others goes on, and that we continue to, bring financial freedom to more people. So we couldn't be more honored to be receiving the funds, and we'll work with you to make sure they, again, are dispensed extremely effectively, and can't wait to see how that goes. And just from all of the HRF staff, we're super grateful for the gift. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to let Island introduce the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was incredible. Thanks, guys. Okay, so just to keep things going, the next fireside is called Challenging Financial Colonialism. More than 180 million people in 14 authoritarian countries in Central and West Africa live under French monetary colonialism. They continue to use the CFA currency, a relic of the colonial era. Any attempt to challenge the status quo is met with significant resistance. So now we'll hear about the connection between democracy movements in the region and the movement for currency reform. So please welcome Jeff Booth and Farida Nabourema.
Just give us a second here some folks are coming out, a lot more folks are coming in. Give us 1 minute here. Thank you so much. All right.
Okay, here they are.
Seats are now opening up. Wonderful. Here's Farida coming through. Wonderful. Here's Jeff. Go on up, come on down. Thank you, guys. Honestly, such an important topic that has literally never been discussed ever at another human rights conference, and that alone will blow your mind once you're done with this conversation. So we're super excited to be ripping off the Band-Aid here and revealing this, reality, and couldn't be more thrilled that these two are going to do it. So thanks again.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, let's get going in this. For people that don't know you, Farida, could you give your backstory? Growing up in Togo, kind of what led you to being an activist?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've been having a good experience so far. So I'm Farida. I'm from Togo, one of the least populated countries in Africa, 8 million people. And my country has a particular story, is that we have been ruled by the oldest military regime in Africa. And the first dictator ruled for 38 years. And when he died, his son did a coup and took over and has been ruling ever since. I became an activist at a pretty young age, accidentally, when my father was arrested when I was 13 years old by the dictatorship for holding meetings against the regime. But although it wasn't the first time my dad went to prison, it was the first time that I was old enough to understand what was happening, and I was involved in the process. Growing up in Togo is a very interesting thing because a lot of African nations have known severe dictators, but I consider ours to be one of the worst because our former president, Eyadema Simbe, had extremely narcissistic traits. He was super fond of himself. We don't go to school on Wednesday afternoons, and on Saturdays we have to practice choreographies to dance for him every Sunday. Then every day when he's going to work, we have to line up from his house to the presidency to clap for him when he's going to work and clap for him when he's coming back. We do it 4 times a day because he takes an afternoon nap and he goes back. And so when he travels, it's the same thing. Under Eyadema, it was complete ban on all public radio. There were only 1 elections that take place, the presidential elections. The mayors were appointed, the member of parliament were appointed. But even for the presidential elections, he was the only candidate, so you could only vote for him on that thing. That went on for decades, and then in the early 90s, there was a massive, the east wind, as they call it, for democracy, kind of like reached part of Africa, and the student movement managed to force him to call for constitutional reform, which introduced term limits, but then he never respected it anyway. He accepted the conditions and eventually just used violence to imprison everybody who asked him to leave after the official 2 terms he served from 1992 to 2002 ended. And my dad was one of the people who was challenging that and ended up in prison. So since Eyadema has died, his son has continued his brilliant legacy of torture, human rights abuses, and killing. He's his father's son and can only do that. And as of today, we continue to have hundreds of political prisoners in Togo. There is no such thing as freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. It doesn't exist. I'm like, in Togo, literally the only freedom you have is the freedom to die. That's your choice, but nothing else. The government controls every single aspect of our livelihood.
So I remember in one of your previous stories, you talked about how you would work for so much time and then a devaluation of your currency. And that would happen over and over and over again. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that's connected?
Yeah, I'm going to have to walk you a little bit through history, so pardon me if I sound a bit too talkative, but the context is important. So Togo became a dictatorship not accidentally. It was planned for a reason. So initially, my country was colonized by Germany. Then when the Germans lost World War I, the League of the Nations, which eventually became the United Nations, technically handed over Togo to Great Britain and France, because the 2 of them were fighting for it, because the Brits felt like the French owned too much territory in West Africa, and they didn't want to let go of it. So they decided that the Great Britain will take 1/3 and the eastern side, because they have Ghana on the eastern side, the Gold Coast, and then France will take the other 2/3. So the 1/3 that was under Great Britain in 1957 rallied with the Gold Coast to form modern-day Ghana, and the other 2/3 actually was asked to join Dahomey to form Benin, but they said no, we want our independence. So the independence movement in Togo started from the 40s, and in 1946, right after World War II, created a currency called the CFA. And that currency was inspired by a model the Nazi regime used